That my job as a pastor, as a leader, is to consistently and courageously point all of us to the person of Jesus Christ, no matter the cost. It's time to surrender to the love that God has for you in Christ. Every day, make it your number one priority to win yourself to Christ. That you actually need to go back and reinvestigate the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ. Is that possible? Is it possible that you need to do that? Eternal life is something that possesses you. And it will never fully, truly possess you until you begin to know God and Jesus Christ whom He sent. Know Him rightly as He is, a God who forgives sinners, raises the dead, and makes new things out of nothing. That's the good news.
I get excited to know that there is a group of people here at Waterville Community Church willing to say yes to the journey of knowing God in Christ, growing their faith, and going where He sends.
We're being controlled internally by an authentic love for God through Christ. That when you come to know God through Christ, you love Him. What's not to love? What would you not love? The call on your life is to give complete, unwavering, uncompromising allegiance to Jesus and only Jesus.
And this whole story here, God's trying to say, no, you need to be delivered from your enemy-making tendencies. That's what I think God is pulling us towards. It should be pointing towards something we see in Jesus.
It's because I'm trying to participate in what's true. I'm trying to be a true human. I'm trying to bear the fruit of perfect love that's embodied in my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to participate in what's true. When you open your mouth and you say, Jesus is Lord, you're making a pledge of allegiance. You're saying that over my life, Jesus is in charge. I'm pledging my allegiance to Jesus. My primary concern is that your primary concern is being faithful to Jesus Christ. Well, hey everyone, welcome to week 3 of a series we're calling Learning Love. You know, any organization, but especially a church, needs some way for its members, its participants to, have a shared sense of who they are and what they're about. But that can't be kind of arbitrarily or externally imposed. It has to be something that's sort of birthed out of shared experience, right? It's not something that you decide as much as it's something you discover. Now, our team has been reflecting on our shared life over the last 10 years, and this series is about sharing the things that we've discovered, that we hope will give us that shared sense of who we are and what we're about, that'll kind of galvanize us and move us forward into the next 10 years. So one of the things in our reflection that we've discovered is that, for the last 10 years, we've been pretty Jesus-centered, right? When I first got here, I was very clear that I want to be about consistently and courageously pointing everyone to the person of Jesus Christ, no matter the cost. And for 10 years, we've worked pretty hard at establishing a Jesus-shaped image of God, right? God is just like Jesus, but also this spiritually flexible posture, right? We've become the kinds of people who I think are willing to let Jesus lead us, even if it's in unexpected or, initially unwelcomed ways, right? So moving forward over the next 10 years, we're going to continue to be radically Jesus-centered, but I think our area of focus is going to have to shift from this sort of spiritual flexibility to what I've called depth, spiritual depth, right? Trying to focus on how deep do the Jesus roots really need to go into our lives. And then also what I've called integrity or integration, right? That we've got to be intentional about looking at our lives and deciding what's going on that's choking out, to use language from one of Jesus' parables, choking out the fruitfulness of our faith. So the next 10 years, or for as long as it takes, we're going to really focus on spiritual depth and integrity, right? And to do that, to use a churchy word or a Bible word, what I'm really talking about is discipleship, a process of learning, right? And so to help us on this journey, we want to start thinking about our church as a learning community or a vocational school, right? We are going to be in the business of learning the way of Jesus, which is the way of love, because Jesus reveals that God is love. So we're going to We're going to talk about our church as a vocational school, and our core focus is learning the way of Jesus, which is the way of love, because Jesus reveals God as love. So just shorthand, we're in the business of learning love. That's our vocation. That is our life's work. So when you're inviting a neighbor to church, or when someone asks you about your church and you're talking about it, this is how I want us to talk about it. That we're a learning community. We're a gathering, we're a vocational school. We are in the business of learning the way of Jesus, learning love. Okay, so we're a school because we're in the business of learning. We're a vocational school because we're in the business of learning how to do something, right? Walk in the way of Jesus, walk in the way of love. But that modifier, vocational, doesn't just pertain to what we're learning. It also pertains to how we learn. Right? Most of us, in our sort of understanding of an educational setting, it's usually in a classroom. We usually sit in a desk and we kind of passively receive knowledge that we then, sort of go and regurgitate on some kind of a test or assessment, right? Vocational education is usually experience-based. It's hands-on, and not just as application. So it's not just you sit in a classroom, you learn some stuff, and then you have to go out into the field and you have to do it. Usually in vocational training, the actual doing of the thing is how you learn how to do it. Or in another way, is to learn the way, you learn on the way. So it is an illustration. There a movie years ago called The Guardian. Kevin Costner plays this rescue swimmer for the Coast Guard, and his partner dies in a rescue mission, and so Costner's character takes a furlough from the field to become an instructor at the Coast Guard Academy. And one of the lessons that the trainees are supposed to learn are the stages of hypothermia, right? They're regularly going to be in ice cold water trying to save people's lives. So they have to learn the stages of hypothermia, right? Stage 1, shivering, slowed heart rate. Stage 2, decreased heart rate, loss of muscle control, whatever the stages are. You can imagine yourself making the note cards for the test, right? You put stage 1 on the front, you flip it over, you write the characteristics, and stage 2, and you study those because you're going to take a test. That's normally how you would learn those things. When Costner gets to the academy, he decides to do something different. Instead of just giving them the information in a classroom, he gets a pool, kind of like a kid pool, right? Like a circular outdoor backyard pool, like about that big, and he fills it with ice. And then he makes all of the trainees get into it. And as they actually experience the stages of hypothermia, as they're all together, and he's with them, as they're in the pool just shivering, and as they're experiencing loss of muscle control and decreased heart rate and slowed breathing, he's able to communicate to them out of his own lived experience, saving people's lives in conditions like this, what they're going to have to overcome if they're going to be Coast Guards, if they're going to go out and save people's lives in environments like this. Now, while they're in the pool, the director of the academy comes in and he calls Costner's character out of the pool, and he says, "What are you doing? They're just supposed to learn the stages of hypothermia." And Costner looks at him, and he's shivering, and he looks at his watch, and he says, "In about 45 seconds, they'll understand." Right? And they did. And that's the idea. It's a good example of a kind of vocational education. It's in most educational settings, we tend to think that instruction precedes experience. But in vocational education, it's usually the other way around. It's experience precedes instruction, or the instruction is made powerful because it's spoken into a lived experience. So I want you to think about how Jesus actually trained his disciples to walk in his way. Or he called them to follow him, come follow me, come walk in my way. But how did he train them? Did he say, "Hey, meet me once a week in a classroom so we can talk about a Bible passage"? Did he design a discipleship curriculum for them to follow? No. Life was the classroom. That he commissioned them and he sent them out to do things and then taught into their shared experience together. In other words, he taught them how to live the way on the way. So in Mark's telling of the Jesus story, this is in Mark chapter 3. This is sort of the beginning of their at least formal relationship. This is what it says. "Afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain, and called out the ones he wanted to go with him, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12 of them and called them his apostles. They were to accompany him, and he would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. I want to make a couple observations about how Jesus trains people and how, because it speaks to how we want to train people. We want to be about learning. We want to be about learning the Jesus way. And to do that, we've got to do it the way that Jesus did it. So the first thing is that Jesus called people to himself. He called them to accompany him. So this should go without saying, but when we talk about learning the Jesus way or learning the way of love, we're talking about learning from Jesus. Jesus is our rabbi, our shepherd, our teacher, or to use vocational language, our master. But Christianity is not about learning, universal ethical principles. It is about following the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Without the incarnate, the embodied Jesus of Nazareth, there is no Christianity. We don't have access to who God is, and we don't know how to participate in the life of God except through Jesus of Nazareth. So when we talk about vocational training, we're not talking about learning principles. We're talking about learning how to listen to and follow the living Jesus through Jesus' Spirit. Right? Jesus is our master teacher. So that's something that's really important about vocational training. The second is that vocational training or education takes some intentionality. So Jesus goes up on a mountain, which was a very symbolic place for a rabbi like him to do what he does here. Rabbis distinguished, we have one word in English, we have the word disciple, and that word means student or learner. But in Jesus' culture, they distinguished between a learner, a student, and a disciple. So a learner, a student, was someone who was interested in hearing what a rabbi had to say. A disciple was someone primarily interested in imitating the rabbi's way of life. And rabbis were far more interested in the latter than the former, right? Rabbis were not predominantly interested in gathering a big crowd. I mean, if a crowd showed up to listen to them teach, fine, they would teach and speak. But what they were primarily concerned about was gathering to themselves a small group of people who could learn how to take upon themselves the rabbi's way of life or their yoke, which was language that even Jesus would use. Take my yoke upon you. That's what a rabbi was doing. A rabbi wanted to gather a small group of people and train them, apprentice them, not to just listen to what he said, but to walk in his way, to take his yoke upon them, not only so that they would embody it in their own lives, but because that kind of deep learning and transformation would then be able to facilitate them teaching other people and shaping other people. It's something that could be passed along because you weren't just passing along head knowledge, you were passing along something that had become your very way of life. Right? So when we talk about vocational education, one of the things that's going to happen in our church over the next 10 years is, like it or not, because of the way that we're going to program and our strategy and the things that we're going to do and the things that we're going to call you to do, we're going to make a distinction between, or a distinction is just going to happen between people who are primarily interested in listening to something, wow, that was a great message, or oh, that was a great sermon, or that was really interesting what you said there, versus people who are primarily interested in learning how to walk in a particular way, how to be transformed so that their lives are as close an approximation to Jesus' life as we can get, right? Learning to walk in the way of love. The rabbis have to do that. They had to discern who wants to do this, who has the aptitude to do this. Well, we want to be a church of people who aren't just interested in listening, hearing, but people who are actually interested in going into the world and living like Jesus. That's the second thing. Third thing, vocational education happens in the context of relationship. So as Jesus calls these people to himself, he's also calling them together. So I want you to think of like a triangle with Jesus at the apex, right? And Peter's on one vertice and John's at the other. As they get closer to Jesus, they also get closer together. Vocational education happens in the context of community, right? These people, they were confused together. They were inspired together. They were excited together, scared together. They challenged each other. They worked things out together. You have a personal relationship with Jesus But Jesus said to his disciples that the world would know he was sent by God by the quality of our relationship with one another. We need each other. And so a big part of moving forward over the next 10 years as we think about strategy and programming and what we do and how we do and what we don't do and why we do this and not that, a big component is going to be doing it together, being together. That this has to happen in the context of relationship with other people. Okay, last thing, and I said this sort of at the top of the message. Vocational education assumes that experience precedes instruction. That experience can precede instruction. That we don't just sit in a classroom and we learn stuff and then hopefully we go do it, but we go do stuff. And in the process of doing things, it raises questions for us. And those are the questions that Jesus and helpful teachers can then speak into in order to facilitate actual transformation, right? We all know I don't know what the numbers are, but you've heard it said, right? You remember what, 20% of what you see and 40% of what you see and hear and 70% of what you see, hear, and do. Doing is key to learning. And so as a vocational school, this learning community, we're trying to learn the way of love, the way of Jesus, right? It has to focus on experience. Our strategy, whatever we do and don't do, or the programs that we offer, the things that we call you to, it's going to be experience-based. We got to go do things because it's in the process of doing that it creates the context for us to have deep learning opportunities. I think there are a lot of you who are waiting to go and do stuff because you don't feel like you know enough, you haven't learned enough, you're not ready. I wonder if the reason maybe you feel like you're not ready or you haven't learned enough or you haven't grown enough or you're not mature enough is because you haven't gone and done. That if you actually just went and did something, you would have an experience that then God, through the Spirit, with the help of your community, could then teach into. And that's what would create the sort of transformative growth. Let me give you a couple of examples, 2 from Jesus' life, 1 from my own. In Luke's telling of the Jesus story, Jesus sends out a bunch of these disciples, right? He sends them out into the world. And they go out and they preach and they cast out demons. They do all this stuff. They come back and they say to Jesus, Jesus, they're so excited. Even the demons submit to us when we use your name. When we cast them out in your name, they do it. And they're so excited. And Jesus, he doesn't downplay it. He matches their excitement. This is amazing, right? But then he says something interesting to them. He says, don't let your joy be that the demons submit to you, but that your names are registered in heaven, or that your names are written in the book of life. Now, Jesus is not being a Debbie Downer. He's not trying to step on their hose and squash their excitement. He's trying to teach them something. He knows that participating in the casting out of evil, it's an exhilarating thing. Watching people's lives change and knowing that you were at the center of it can be intoxicating. It can be addicting. It can be the kind of thing where you start thinking, this is about you. You've got all this power, and right? It's about what you're doing and the affirmation that you receive from it. And Jesus knows that if that happens, it'll kill your soul. That you'll go out into the world and you'll try to participate in the casting out of evil, but you'll become the evil that you're trying to cast out. But if you can keep at the center of your understanding that you are beloved, right? That what is really important here is that God knows you, God cares for you, that you are God's child. If that's what's ultimately important, right? Then you'll stay healthy and you can be helpful. Okay? Now he could have told them that in a classroom, but teaching them that lesson while they're riding this wave of excitement because of this stuff that they just got to do and got to experience, I'm guessing really anchored it home in a way that they never forgot. Hey, remember that time we cast out demons, we came back, and Jesus, remember that lesson, right? This is about knowing that we're beloved by God. That's where everything starts, is God's love and grace toward us, right? God's saving work toward us, right? And we work out of that. Okay, second example. Jesus takes a couple of his disciples up onto a mountain, and while they're up on the mountain, a father with a demon-possessed boy come to the rest of Jesus' disciples, and he asks them to drive this demon out, right? Which Jesus had given them authority to do, and which they had previously been successful at doing. They can't drive it out for some reason. Jesus comes down the mountain. He finds all this commotion because this father's upset because they can't drive out the demon out of his son. Jesus asks him some questions. Short story long, eventually, Jesus casts this demon out. And afterward, when the crowd disperses, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, well, I don't understand. Why couldn't we cast it out? And Jesus says, this kind can only come out through prayer. Well, what's the lesson here? They had been successful driving out demons before, using his name. We already know that. But that doesn't mean that it's just going to work that way every time. Right? Not every situation is the same. And you can't just roll into every new situation thinking that you just have the power to do it. So you can just sort of replicate a strategy and it's magically going to work. That the power to cast evil out of the world is on loan from God. That if any good is going to happen in the world, it's going to happen because God and God's power act in it. And you have to remember that. And you have to submit to that and humble yourself to it. It's a huge lesson. Again, he could have told them that in a classroom, but I'm guessing it would have gone in one ear and out the other. But because he teaches them that right after they've had this confusing, frustrating encounter with this father and his son, I'm guessing they never forgot it. And that then shaped the way that they moved forward, and then eventually what they taught to other people. All right, one example from my own life. When I was in college, I volunteered for a parachurch ministry whose mission was to introduce kids, high school students, to Jesus and help them grow in their faith. And so I got placed at this local high school, and I would go to the high school regularly. I'd go to the lunchroom during the week to just, meet kids and build relationships in the hope of eventually being able to talk to them about Jesus. There was this group of upperclassmen. I was a freshman in college. There was a group of seniors, so they were just 1 year younger than me, that when I would go to the lunchroom and I would walk around from table to table, they knew that I was like the God guy. They weren't really thrilled that I was there. So they would throw things at me, like spitballs and paper wads and that kind of stuff. By God's grace, I was never hit. But this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks this went on. And I didn't ever confront them. I didn't ever go over there because quite frankly, I was scared. I was there as a volunteer. I wasn't much older than them. I didn't know what they would do if I went over to their table. I didn't want to risk like some kind of weird situation. So I just tried to avoid them. But eventually, I kind of heard God communicate to my spirit, but Mike, that's why you're here. I mean, this is what you're going here for. So I kind of resolved in my spirit that if they threw something at me again, I was going to go over there. So the next time I went to the lunchroom, I was sitting at this table talking to these kids, and a foil ball comes sailing over my head and it lands on the table. And so immediately I know what I have to do. I kind of close my eyes, I say a quick prayer to myself, and I grab the foil ball and I get up and I walk toward their table. And when I get over there, they're all sitting there, and I put the foil ball on the table in a sort of snarky way. I say, hey, I think you dropped this. But then I very politely said, hi, I'm Mike. And I went to introduce myself. And what I expected to happen, I expected the heavens to part. I expected doves to descend, because I was being so faithful. I expected this kid who had thrown it, I expected him to start crying and repent of the way that he had treated me and start following Jesus on the spot. Instead, he doesn't even look up at me. He doesn't reciprocate my gesture. He just looks down, he rattles off a couple of very vulgar expletives, and he tells me to get lost. I was shocked. I was confused. I was angry. I was embarrassed. I walked away just with my head down, kind of in this like, oh my gosh, what just happened? That was not what I expected. But in that moment, I sensed God say to me, Mike, you can't reach everybody, and you can't save anybody. And see, that's a lesson I needed to learn, because at the time, I thought I could reach everybody, and I genuinely believed it was up to me. That if people were going to come to know Jesus, it was all on my shoulders. And that was not a healthy posture. It's something that would have destroyed my soul, and it would have taken me out of ministry. I would not be here today if I had not heard that message. Now, somebody could have told me that in a classroom, and I'm sure somebody did. But it went in one ear and out the other. Yeah, I got it, right? But in that moment, on the tail end of this really confusing, frustrating, embarrassing experience, I heard God basically say, Mike, I got this. Do your part. You're a person of limits. Give what you can, but understand, I love that kid. I'll take care of things, right? You can rest in that. It was incredibly transformative for me. It's something that has shaped my whole way of life and ministry. I've told that story to countless people, and when I've seen this in other people who I've had the privilege to help lead, this is one of those lessons that I try to help them understand and appreciate, is you can't reach everybody and you can't save anybody. But you're a person of limits. You give what you can, you do your best, and you trust a good and gracious God to love people and to do what only God can do. It's a huge lesson. I don't know that I would have learned that lesson if I hadn't gone and done the thing first and had this experience. And this is how Jesus did it. He sent his disciples out. They wouldn't have these experiences, and those experiences tended to raise questions, right? Well, who then can be saved? Why couldn't we cast out that demon? Who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he was born this way, right? These kinds of questions that Jesus could then speak into, and it facilitated deep, transformative learning. I mean, that's what we want to be about at our church over the next 10 years. We want to be a vocational school that is about learning the way of Jesus, learning the way of love, because Jesus reveals that God is love. But to do that, we've got to cultivate experience. We need to be people who commit ourselves not just to sitting around and hearing and listening, but to taking the step to go and do something, have an experience that's going to raise questions that then that we can teach into, that will facilitate some of this transformative growth. So just as an example, that's the rationale behind our formation groups. I'm sure there'll be a lot of programs and things that we develop over the years. Right now, we're doing this thing we call formation groups, and this is the rationale behind it, right? 3 times a year, trimesters, because we're a learning institution, we're a vocational school, we're going to roll out a battery of groups. We're calling them formation groups because all of them are for the purpose of spiritual formation, right? They're short-term experiences. They're designed to be that way, 4 to 6 weeks, but they're meant to be organized around some kind of experience, doing something with other people that raise questions that allow you to then engage in deeper, more transformative learning. So we've got a formation group right now where people are reading sermons by an 18th century or 19th century Scottish minister, and they're talking about what is the hope of the gospel. We just did a group on marriage where we had a 3-hour workshop and then it's like follow-up sessions to kind of unpack, hey, what did we learn there and what do we do with it? But there is no limit to the kinds of groups that we might curate or who might lead them. I mean, as you're watching this, you might be thinking, man, I would love to lead or facilitate a group to go do fill in the blank and then facilitate conversation around our experience. That's the idea, right? That's the idea behind formation groups. It's not the only thing that we're going to do, but it's going to be one of our main strategies. Like for me, our Sunday morning gathering, it's important, right? It is the place where we all come to be encouraged and to be anchored in our big story, right? The story of God and us and the world. But we call that church. I'm almost wondering if we should just call that our Sunday gathering. Church for us, I think, really needs to be in these smaller settings, these formation group settings, where we can do stuff together and that can facilitate learning. We need to be people who are going and having experiences, right? That's what we're going to be about over the next 10 years. That vocational learning isn't just about what we're learning, the way of love, but it's also about how. Right? We don't want to be a group of people who are just showing up to listen to something. We want to be a group of people who are saying, I want to be deeply formed in the way of Christ, the way of love. And I know that to do that, I'm going to have to take a step and I got to go do something. You're not going to be trained enough. You're not going to be equipped enough. You're not going to know enough. You're going to feel inadequate, insecure. That's the whole point. You just trust Jesus, go do the thing. And then in the process of doing the thing, it's going to create questions that then can be kind of taught into and transformed so that not only you're living differently, but that eventually you might find yourself in a place where you can instruct somebody else. You can help somebody else learn how to walk in the way of Jesus because you've been deeply formed through your own kind of faithful experiences, right? That's what we're going to be about. Vocational learning, learning the way of love, experience preceding instruction, right? Learning how to live in the way, on the way.
tried to keep you in a tent that could not keep you in a temple or any of their idols to see and understand. We cannot keep you in a church, we cannot keep you in a Bible, or it's just another idol to box you in. They could not keep you in their walls, we cannot keep you in ours either, for you are so much greater. Who is like the Lord, the maker of the heavens, who dwells with the poor, he lifts them from the ashes, and he seats them among princes. Who is like the Lord? We've tried to keep you in our tents, we've tried to keep you in our temples, we've worshipped all our idols, we want all that to end. So we will find you in the streets, and we will find you in the prisons, and even in our Bibles and churches. Who is like the Lord, the maker of the heavens, who dwells with the poor, he lifts them from the ashes, and he seats them among princes. Who is like the We cannot contain the glory of your name. We cannot contain the glory of Who is like the Lord, the maker of the heavens, who dwells with the poor? You took me from the ashes, and you healed me from my blindness. Who is like the Lord?
You know, whether this is your first time joining us or you've been here for a while, I hope there's something in you that's excited about the possibility of the next 10 years. We've done so much work to lay a Jesus-centered foundation, to have a Jesus-shaped image of God and a spiritually flexible posture. Now it's time to work on depth and integrity, and that's going to take learning. We have to learn those things. And so we're going to learn love here at Waterville Community Church, and we're going to specifically learn how to walk in that way on the way, to be people who don't just sit and listen, but we're going to go do things. We're going to have experiences, and we're going to trust Jesus to use those experiences and the questions that they raise to speak into and to teach us, so that we can have transformative learning in our own life, and we can become the kinds of people who can help do that in the lives of other people. I hope you're excited about that. I am. Let me pray for us as we leave today. God, thank you for your grace and mercy as always. We acknowledge that walking in your way is something we have to learn. Thank you for calling us to yourself and for asking us to accompany you, for kind of forcing us to make a decision that we're not going to be people who just listen and are interested in hearing what you have to say,
but actually walking in your way, taking your yoke upon us and imitating you. We're grateful that we get to do that together in relationship. So we embrace this idea of experience preceding instruction, that we're going to be obedient to you. We're going to put ourselves in places and we're going to choose to go do things that we feel ill-equipped to do, that we lack the education for, that we feel insecure about. But we're going to choose to be faithful and put ourselves in places where you can speak to us in ways that transform us and change us. We can become the people who you want us to be, but also because of how we've been deeply formed, we can influence other people. So we trust you to do that, to lead us in the way of love. We love you and we entrust ourselves to you today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Who is like the Lord, the maker of the heavens, who dwells with the poor? You took me from the ashes and you healed me from my blindness. Who is like the